The XF-108 Rapier was designed to intercept Soviet bombers at Mach 3 speeds over the Arctic. North American Aviation built this interceptor around 3 massive engines and a weapons bay packed with nuclear-tipped missiles. The Air Force wanted 480 of them. Full-scale mock-ups were completed by 1959, and the design looked unstoppable. But ICBMs changed everything. Why build expensive interceptors when missiles could reach targets faster and cheaper? Defense Secretary McNamara cancelled the program in September 1959. The Air Force never developed a Mach 3 interceptor. The capability gap. McNamara dismissed became real when Soviet bombers continued flying for decades. The XB-70 Valkyrie remains one of aviation's most beautiful machines. This Mach 3 strategic bomber stretched 185 feet long, with 6 engines and canards that folded down at supersonic speeds. North American built 2 prototypes that actually flew between 1964 and 1969. The first reached Mach 3.08 at 70,000 feet. But Soviet surface-to-air missiles made high-altitude bombing obsolete overnight. ICBMs offered better penetration anyway. One prototype crashed in 1966 during a photo flight, killing the XB-70's co-pilot and an F-104 chase pilot. The program cost $1.5 billion before cancellation. The surviving XB-70 sits in the National Museum of the Air Force today. Republic Aviation designed the XF-103 to reach Mach 3.7 using a combined turbojet ramjet engine. This interceptor would have climbed to 75,000 feet in minutes, hunting Soviet bombers before they reached American cities. The titanium airframe could withstand temperatures exceeding 600 degrees. A full-scale mock-up was built in 1954. Wind tunnel testing showed promising results, but the engine technology proved too ambitious for the era. Development costs spiraled beyond Air Force budgets. The program ended in 1957 before any prototype flew. America never built the ramjet interceptor Republic envisioned. The YF-12 was essentially an armed SR-71 Blackbird. Lockheed built 3 prototypes that flew at Mach 3.35 and carried long-range missiles. This interceptor set speed and altitude records that still stand today. Test pilots loved its performance. The Air Force wanted 93 of them to replace aging F-106s. But Defense Secretary McNamara killed the program in 1968. ICBMs made interceptors seem unnecessary. Budget pressures from Vietnam forced choices. Congress wouldn't fund both the F-111 and YF-12. All 3 YF-12s survived testing. One resides at the Museum of the Air Force. The capability gap it left was never truly filled. The B-58B was an improved version of America's first supersonic bomber. Convair proposed stretching the fuselage, adding more fuel capacity, and improving the engines for better range. The original B-58A could barely reach Moscow from American bases. This upgrade would have fixed that limitation. Mock-ups and engineering studies were completed by 1960. The Air Force showed genuine interest initially, but the B-58A's maintenance costs were astronomical, 3 times higher than the B-52. Adding complexity seemed unwise. Development ended before any B-58B flew. The B-52 outlasted its supersonic replacement by decades. The A-12 Avenger II was supposed to revolutionize carrier aviation. This flying wing stealth bomber would have replaced the A-6 Intruder with radar-evading technology. McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics partnered on the $4.8 billion program starting in 1988. The Navy ordered 620 aircraft, but the program collapsed under its own weight. Composite materials proved harder to manufacture than expected, Weight ballooned 30% over projections. Costs doubled. Defense Secretary Cheney cancelled it in 1991 after spending $2 billion. Not a single prototype ever flew. The F/A-18E/F Super Hornet filled the gap instead. Defense Secretary McNamara forced both services to share one airframe design. The Navy needed a fleet defender with long-range missiles. General Dynamics built 7 prototypes between 1965 and 1968. But the aircraft was too heavy for carrier operations. It weighed 77,000 pounds fully loaded, far too much for safe carrier landings. Pilots complained about poor visibility and handling. The Navy hated it from day one. Congress finally pulled funding in 1968. The F-14 Tomcat emerged from the F-111B's ashes using its engines and weapon system. The F2Y Sea Dart remains the only supersonic seaplane ever built. Convair designed this jet fighter to operate from water, eliminating the need for aircraft carriers. The concept seemed brilliant in 1951. 4 prototypes were built with retractable hydroskis. One reached Mach 1.05 in 1954. But the ride was brutal. Pilots reported violent vibrations during takeoff and landing. One prototype disintegrated during a demonstration, killing the pilot. Salt water corroded everything. Maintenance proved nightmarish. The Navy cancelled the program in 1957. Conventional carriers remained the better solution. The F6D Missileer was designed for one mission: shoot down Soviet bombers from 100 miles away. Douglas proposed a subsonic, long-endurance fighter carrying 6 long-range missiles. It would have loitered for hours, protecting carrier groups from standoff attacks. The Navy loved the concept in 1959. Full-scale mock-ups were built, but the aircraft was slow, barely 500 miles per hour. Critics argued it would be helpless against enemy fighters. Defense Secretary McNamara chose the F-111B instead. The Missileer died in 1961 without flying. The F-14 Tomcat eventually fulfilled this mission decades later. The P-6M Seamaster was a jet-powered seaplane bomber designed to operate from protected harbors. Martin built this massive aircraft with 4 engines and swept wings. 6 prototypes flew between 1955 and 1959. The Seamaster could carry nuclear weapons at 600 miles per hour. But seaplanes needed calm water for operations. They were sitting ducks on the surface. 2 prototypes crashed during testing, killing crews and destroying confidence. Land-based bombers were faster, safer, and more flexible. The Navy ended the program in 1959 after spending $400 million. Polaris submarine-launched missiles made the Seamaster obsolete anyway. The YF-23 was faster and stealthier than the F-22 Raptor. Northrop built 2 prototypes that flew in 1990 during the Advanced Tactical Fighter competition. Test pilots praised its speed and handling. The YF-23 reached Mach 1.6 without afterburners. Its diamond wing design reduced radar signature better than the F-22. But the Air Force chose the F-22 anyway. Lockheed had demonstrated better risk reduction in manufacturing. The F-22's weapons bay integration was more mature. Lockheed's thrust vectoring offered better maneuverability. The YF-23 was optimized for speed and stealth, the future threat. The F-22 was optimized for dogfighting, the familiar mission. Both YF-23 prototypes survive in museums today. Many experts still argue it was the better aircraft. Northrop privately funded the F-20 Tiger Shark as an affordable fighter for export and smaller air forces. The company built 3 prototypes that could outperform the F-16 in certain scenarios. It was easier to maintain and cost half as much. Test pilots loved it. But the Reagan administration changed export policies, allowing direct F-16 sales to Allied nations. The F-20's market evaporated overnight. 2 prototypes crashed during airshow demonstrations, killing both pilots. Development ended in 1986, after Northrop spent $1.2 billion. No country ever ordered it. The F-16 dominated the export market instead. The X-32 competed against the F-35 for the Joint Strike Fighter contract. Boeing built 2 prototypes with a distinctive gaping intake. The design looked unusual, but performed well in testing. Boeing promised lower costs and simpler maintenance. But the X-32 had problems. The lift fan system for vertical takeoff was less elegant than Lockheed's solution. The aircraft was heavier than promised. Lockheed's X-35 demonstrated better agility and carrier suitability. The Pentagon chose the F-35 in 2001. Boeing's loss cost them the largest fighter contract in history. Both X-32 prototypes now sit in museums. The XF-8U-3 Crusader III was Vort's answer to the F-4 Phantom II. This Mach 2.7 fighter featured advanced radar and missile systems. Vought built 3 prototypes that flew in 1958. The XF-8U-3 was faster than the Phantom and had better climb performance. But the F-4 carried more weapons and had 2 crew members instead of 1. The Navy preferred the Phantom's versatility. The F-4 could perform multiple missions: fighter, bomber, reconnaissance. The XF-8U-3 was purely an interceptor. The Navy chose the Phantom in 1959. All 3 Crusader III prototypes were scrapped. The XF-85 Goblin was a parasite fighter, designed to deploy from B-36 bombers. McDonnell built 2 prototypes of this tiny jet fighter. The concept seemed logical in 1948. Bombers needed escort fighters for deep penetration missions. The Goblin would launch from the bomber's bomb bay, fight off interceptors, then return and dock. But the reality was terrifying. Test pilots struggled to hook back onto the bomber in turbulent air. The Goblin was too small to carry meaningful weapons or fuel. Air-to-air refueling made the concept obsolete anyway. The program ended in 1949. Both prototypes survive in museums today. The B-1A was designed to replace the B-52 with supersonic speed and terrain-following capability. Rockwell built 4 prototypes that flew between 1974 and 1981. The B-1A could reach Mach 2.2 at high altitude, or fly 200 feet above ground at 600 miles per hour. But President Carter cancelled the program in 1977, arguing that cruise missiles and stealth bombers made it unnecessary. The decision was controversial. Reagan revived the program in 1981 as the B-1B, with reduced speed but better stealth. The B-1B entered service in 1986. The original B-1A's pure speed capability was never built. All 4 prototypes were scrapped or preserved. The X-20 Dyna-Soar was a spaceplane designed to launch on a Titan rocket, orbit Earth, then glide back to a runway landing. Boeing won the contract in 1957. The program aimed to put military pilots in space for reconnaissance and bombing missions. A full-scale mock-up was built. Pilot training began. But the program competed with NASA's manned spaceflight efforts. Defense Secretary McNamara questioned its military value. Costs escalated to $660 million by 1963. Development ended before any orbital flight. The Space Shuttle inherited many Dyna-Soar concepts decades later. No X-20 ever flew. The XB-28 could bomb Japan from altitudes Japanese fighters couldn't reach. By the time it flew, nobody cared. North American built 2 prototypes in 1942. This pressurized bomber could fly at 35,000 feet, above Japanese fighter range. The XB-28 was fast and well-armed, but the Army Air Forces changed priorities. B-29 superfortresses offered better payload and range. The XB-28's pressurization system was complex and unreliable. By 1943, the Pacific Island hopping campaign made Chinese bases less critical. Both prototypes were scrapped. The B-29 became the Pacific bomber instead. Convair's XB-46 looked sleek and modern when it flew in 1947. Boeing's B-47 made it instantly obsolete. This medium bomber featured 4 engines in underwing pods and a sleek fuselage. The XB-46 performed adequately in testing, but it competed against the B-47 Stratojet, which was simply better. Boeing's swept-wing design was faster and more efficient. The XB-46's straight wings were already obsolete. The Air Force chose the B-47 in 1948. Convair's prototype was scrapped shortly after. The B-47 became one of the most successful bombers ever built. The XB-51 was an innovative attack bomber with 3 engines and variable incidence wings. Martin built 2 prototypes that flew in 1949. This aircraft could take off from short runways and deliver tactical nuclear weapons. The XB-51 was fast and maneuverable for a bomber, but it competed against the B-57 Canberra, a British design that Martin would license build. The B-57 was already proven in combat. It was cheaper to produce. The Air Force chose the B-57 in 1951. Both XB-51 prototypes were used for testing, then scrapped. The B-57 served for decades. The RAH-66 Comanche was supposed to revolutionize Army aviation with stealth technology. Boeing and Sikorsky partnered on this armed reconnaissance helicopter starting in 1991. 2 prototypes flew between 1996 and 2004. The Comanche featured radar-absorbing materials and a sleek design. But costs exploded to $39 billion for the full program. The Army needed helicopters in Iraq and Afghanistan immediately. The Comanche wouldn't be ready for years. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld cancelled it in 2004. The Army bought more Apaches and Blackhawks instead. Both prototypes were destroyed. The capability gap remains today. The AH-56 Cheyenne was a compound helicopter with a pusher propeller and rigid rotor. Lockheed built 10 prototypes starting in 1967. This attack helicopter could reach 240 miles per hour, far faster than conventional helicopters. The Cheyenne carried rockets, missiles, and a belly turret. But the design was complex and unstable. 3 prototypes crashed during testing. The rigid rotor system caused control problems. Costs doubled from initial estimates. The Army pulled funding in 1972 after spending $900 million. The simpler AH-64 Apache replaced it. The Apache proved more reliable and easier to maintain. The X-47B demonstrated that autonomous drones could operate from aircraft carriers. Northrop built 2 prototypes that flew between 2011 and 2015. The X-47B successfully launched from and landed on carriers autonomously. It refueled in flight from a tanker. The technology worked perfectly. But the Navy chose to develop the MQ-25 Stingray tanker drone instead. The X-47B's strike mission was deemed less urgent than carrier-based refueling. Budget constraints forced a choice. Development ended in 2015. Both prototypes were retired to museums. The X-47B proved the concept but never led to production. The X-45C was an unmanned combat air vehicle designed for deep strike missions. Boeing proposed this enlarged version of the X-45A demonstrator. The X-45C would have carried 4,500 pounds of weapons internally. It featured advanced stealth shaping and autonomous flight systems. The Air Force planned to buy them in large numbers, but the program merged with the Navy's X-47 effort in 2006 to save money. The joint program collapsed under conflicting requirements. The X-45C was cancelled before any prototype flew. Boeing's investment was wasted. The Air Force still lacks a dedicated unmanned strike aircraft today.
The S-72 X-Wing represented one of aviation's most radical concepts, a helicopter that could stop its rotor in flight and fly like a conventional aircraft. Sikorsky and NASA partnered in the 1980s to develop this hybrid design. The rotor blades would blow compressed air through slots, creating circulation control that allowed the stopped rotor to act as an X-shaped wing. A full-scale research aircraft flew from 1986 to 1988, proving the circulation control concept. But transitioning from helicopter to fixed-wing mode proved enormously complex. The program ended in 1988, after demonstrating the technology without achieving full transition. The Army needed practical helicopters, not experimental hybrids. No production was ever planned, but the X-Wing represented the boundary of what rotorcraft could become.